The bullet grazed the side of the stagecoach just as it lurched into a pothole, sending Elara Anderson tumbling forward into the lap of the portly merchant across from her. She heard screaming, felt the thunderous pounding of hoofbeats against packed earth, and then nothing but the sound of her own pulse hammering in her ears as the world spun sideways. When the coach finally came to rest on its side in a shallow ravine, she lay crumpled against splintered wood, her weak leg twisted beneath her at an angle that made her vision blur with pain. The year was 1878, and bandits had become bolder along the Montana Territory routes leading to Deer Lodge. Elara had known the risks when she boarded that stagecoach in Helena, carrying nothing but a worn carpetbag and the last of her savings. At 22 years old, she had already endured more than most women twice her age. The childhood fever that had ravaged her left leg had stolen her ability to walk without assistance, and the cane she relied upon now lay broken somewhere in the wreckage above her. She heard boots crunching on gravel, voices arguing in harsh tones about whether there was anything worth taking from the overturned coach. The other passengers had fled or lay silent. Elara held her breath, praying the bandits would not find her tucked into the shadowed corner of the wreckage. Her leg throbbed with a pain so intense she had to bite down on her sleeve to keep from crying out. Then came a sound that made the arguing voices fall silent. A rifle shot, clean and precise, echoed across the ravine. Another followed, and another. Elara heard the bandits scrambling for their horses, shouting curses as they retreated. Heavy footsteps approached the coach, slower and more deliberate than those of the fleeing outlaws. "Anyone alive in there?" The voice was deep, rough as gravel, but there was something careful in it too. "Here," Elara managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here." The broken door above her was wrenched away with a screech of metal and wood. Sunlight flooded in, silhouetting a figure so broad-shouldered he seemed to block out the sky itself. As her eyes adjusted, she saw him clearly. A mountain of a man with dark hair that hung past his shoulders, a thick beard covering a jaw that looked carved from granite, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His arms, bare beneath rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle that flexed as he reached down toward her. "Can you move?" he asked. "My leg," she said, gesturing to where it remained pinned beneath a section of the overturned bench. "I cannot free it." He studied the situation for a moment, then braced his hands against the heavy bench. With a grunt of effort that made the muscles in his shoulders and back strain against his shirt, he lifted the entire weight of it high enough for Elara to drag herself free. She bit back a scream as her damaged leg scraped against the floor. When she was clear, he lowered the bench and climbed fully into the wreckage, crouching beside her. Up close, she could see the scars that marked his hands and forearms, the weathered tan of someone who lived entirely outdoors, the way his eyes moved across her body with clinical efficiency, checking for injuries. "Name's Yates Brennan," he said. "Can you stand?" "I could not stand properly before the accident," Elara admitted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment and pain. "I have been lame since childhood. My cane is broken somewhere up there." Yates looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then, without asking permission, he slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. She gasped at the sudden movement, her hands instinctively clutching at his shoulders. The muscle beneath her fingers was solid as oak. "I have a camp about 2 miles north," he said, carrying her away from the wreckage with long, sure strides. "You need water and rest. That leg needs tending." "The other passengers," she started to protest. Driver made it out, lit out for Deer Lodge on the spare horse. "2 others ran into the trees when the shooting started. You were the only one left behind," The words stung more than they should have. Of course they had left her. She was a burden, always had been. People tolerated her when they had to, but when danger came, she was expendable. As if sensing her thoughts, Yates glanced down at her. They were fools to leave you, woman with your courage, staying quiet in that wreckage while bandits prowled around. That takes steel. The unexpected compliment left her speechless. She studied his profile as he walked, noting the strong line of his nose, the concentration in his eyes as he picked his way through the rough terrain without jostling her unnecessarily. He smelled of pine smoke and leather, and despite the circumstances, she felt safer than she had in months. His camp proved to be exactly what she expected from a man who looked like he belonged more to the wilderness than to civilization. A canvas tent was pitched beneath a stand of towering pines, with a fire ring surrounded by logs for sitting. Furs and supplies hung from tree branches, and a magnificent bay horse was tethered nearby, grazing peacefully. The camp was neat and organized in a way that spoke of long practice living alone in the wild. Yates settled her on a bedroll spread over a thick bear pelt, then set about building up the fire. She watched him move with economical grace despite his size, each motion purposeful and efficient. When he had the flames crackling, he filled a tin cup from a water skin and brought it to her. "Drink slow," he instructed. "Then I need to look at that leg." Elara's hands shook as she took the cup. Now that the immediate danger had passed, shock was setting in. She sipped the cool water, grateful beyond words. When she finished, Yates knelt beside her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as they examined her injured leg through her torn skirt. "It is already weak," she explained quietly. "From the fever when I was a child. The bones never set properly. I can walk with a cane, but not well and not far." "Fever," Yates repeated, his brow furrowing. "Scarlet fever," she nodded. He was quiet for a moment, his hands still. Then he said, "Lost my sister to scarlet fever when I was 15. She was 8 years old." "I'm sorry," Elara whispered. "Long time ago." He resumed his examination, his touch professional but careful. "Nothing broken here that wasn't already. You'll have bruising for weeks, but the bone hasn't shifted. You were lucky." "I don't feel particularly lucky." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "You're alive. That's luckier than most who tangle with the Crane brothers." "Is that who they were?" recognized the leader's voice. "They've been working this territory for 3 months. Law can't seem to catch them." He sat back on his heels. "What were you doing on that stage, if you don't mind my asking?" Elara hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding the truth. "Going to Deer Lodge to be a seamstress. A widow there advertised for help in her shop. She knew about my leg, said it wouldn't matter since the work is done sitting. It was the first opportunity I've had in 2 years of looking. Family, dead. Parents 5 years ago, within months of each other. I've been working where I could since then, but positions are few for someone like me." She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away. "People assume I cannot work because I cannot walk properly, or they assume I'll be too much trouble." Yates nodded slowly. "People are fools about a lot of things." He rose and went to his supplies, returning with strips of clean cloth and a small tin. "This is going to sting," he warned before applying a sharp-smelling salve to the scrapes and cuts on her leg. She hissed, but didn't pull away. His hands worked quickly, bandaging the worst of the damage with the skill of someone who had tended many wounds. "You live out here alone?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the pain. "For 3 years now. I trap, hunt, trade furs in town when I need supplies. It suits me." "Why?" He didn't answer immediately, finishing the bandaging before sitting back. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I was a soldier. Did things in the war I'm not proud of, saw things that don't leave a man. After my sister died, my father took his grief out in drink and fists. My mother just faded away. When they were both gone, I found I preferred the company of mountains to the company of men. The raw honesty in his words struck something deep in Elara's chest. She understood isolation, understood being more comfortable at the edges of society than in its center. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving me, for tending my wounds. You didn't have to do any of it." "Yes, I did." He stood, moving to the fire to set a pot of coffee on the coals. "No man worth his salt leaves someone to die when he can help. And no man worth his salt leaves a woman alone on the trail. So what happens now?" Yates poured coffee into 2 tin cups, bringing her one before settling on a log across the fire from her. "Now you rest. Tomorrow, if you're able, I'll take you into Deer Lodge. It's about a day's ride from here." "I cannot ride," she said. "I've never been able to balance properly on a horse. Then I'll make a travois. My horse can pull you." He sipped his coffee, his eyes on the flames. "That seamstress expecting you on a particular day. I sent word I'd arrive by the end of the week. That gives me 4 more days. Then there's no rush. You need to heal a bit first. That leg needs rest and you need food. You're too thin." Elara bristled slightly at his bluntness. "I eat what I can afford." Didn't mean it as an insult, just truth. "Out here, you learn to see what's in front of you clearly. You've been hungry for a while and you're exhausted. Few days of rest will do you good." She wanted to argue, to insist she was fine, but the truth was she couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly rested or truly full. The smell of the coffee alone was making her dizzy with hunger. As if reading her thoughts again, Yates rose and began preparing food. She watched in fascination as he worked, skilled hands making quick work of slicing salt pork and setting it to fry, mixing cornmeal with water for johnnycakes, peeling potatoes. He moved around the camp with the confidence of someone entirely at home in his environment. When the food was ready, he brought her a plate piled higher than she'd seen in months. The pork was crispy and salty, the johnnycakes golden and filling, the potatoes perfectly tender. She tried to eat slowly, tried to maintain some dignity, but she was too hungry. Yates ate his own meal in silence, not commenting on her appetite, for which she was grateful. After they'd eaten, he banked the fire and brought her another blanket. "You take the bedroll. I'll sleep by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," she protested. "You can and you will. You're injured and you're a guest, not up for debate." There was no arguing with that tone. Elara settled back on the bedroll, surprised by how comfortable it was, how warm the furs were against the mountain chill. She watched through drooping eyelids as Yates checked his perimeter, tended to his horse, and finally settled on another fur by the fire, his rifle within easy reach. "Yates," she called softly into the darkness. "Yeah. Why were you so close to the road? You said you prefer solitude." She heard him shift, saw his silhouette against the dying firelight. "Been tracking the Crane brothers for 2 weeks. They killed a friend of mine, an old trapper named Samuel who never hurt anyone in his life. Killed him for a winter's worth of furs and $20 in coin. I've been waiting for them to make another move. You saved me while hunting them." "I did. They got away. This time, there'll be another chance." Elara closed her eyes, processing this. Yates Brennan was a man driven by loyalty and justice, living alone by choice but not without conscience. She had known him for only a few hours, but already she sensed depths in him that would take years to fully understand. She slept better that night than she had in months, despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the ache in her leg. When she woke, dawn was breaking through the pines in shafts of gold and amber. Yates was already up, crouched by the fire with fresh coffee brewing. He looked over when he heard her stir. "How's the leg?" painful, but not worse than yesterday. He brought her coffee and a plate of leftover Jonna cakes with wild honey drizzled over them. As she ate, he began working on something at the edge of camp. Curious, she watched as he selected a long, straight branch from a pile of wood he'd gathered. He examined it carefully, testing its weight and balance before setting it aside and choosing another piece, this one darker and denser. "Is that hickory?" she asked. He glanced over, nodding. "Found a fallen hickory tree about a mile from here last week. Been meaning to do something with it. Hickory's strong, flexible, doesn't break easy." She watched as he began stripping the bark, his knife moving in long, sure strokes. The wood beneath was pale and fine-grained. He worked in silence, completely focused on the task, and she found herself mesmerized by the play of muscles in his forearms and shoulders as he worked. "You're making a cane," she realized. "Walking stick," he corrected. "Better than a cane. I'm going to carve it to fit your height exactly, shape the handle to fit your grip. Hickory will hold your weight without bending." Emotion suddenly clogged Elara's throat. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to, I want to." He looked up at her, his gray eyes serious. "You're going to walk into that seamstress shop on your own feet, standing as tall as you're able. You're going to show her you're capable. And you're going to do it with a walking stick that won't break or fail you." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Yates was quiet for a long moment, his knife still against the wood. "Because someone should have done it years ago. Because you deserve better than a broken cane and people who run off and leave you. And because I can." Elara turned her face away, not wanting him to see the tears that suddenly blurred her vision. No one had ever done something like this for her. No one had ever seen her difficulty and sought to ease it rather than exploit it or ignore it. She didn't know what to do with the fierce gratitude and something else, something warmer and more dangerous, that bloomed in her chest. The morning passed quietly. Yates worked on the walking stick with painstaking care, occasionally asking her to hold out her hand so he could measure the handle against her palm, or to estimate her height against the length. Between these measurements, he tended the camp, checked his trap lines in the nearby woods, and prepared meals. Elara did what she could to help, mending a tear in his shirt with needle and thread from her carpetbag, reorganizing his supply of medical materials into some semblance of order. "You're good with your hands," he observed, watching her neat stitches close the rent fabric. "I've been sewing since I was 6 years old. It was the one thing I could do as well as anyone else, sitting down. Better than most, actually." She knotted the thread and bit it off cleanly. "There. Good as new." He examined the repair, running his thumb over the invisible seam. "Better than new. I can barely see where it was torn." The approval in his voice sent another flush of warmth through her. She busied herself folding the shirt, trying to ignore how her hands trembled slightly. Over the next 2 days, a strange sort of domesticity settled over the camp. Elara grew stronger, able to move around the campsite more easily, though she still couldn't walk without support. Yates continued to work on the walking stick, the hickory slowly taking shape under his skilled hands. He carved intricate patterns into the wood during the long evening hours, designs of mountains and pine trees, deer and eagles. She watched the stick transform from a simple branch into a work of art. They talked during those hours by the fire, tentative at first, then with growing ease. Elara told him about her childhood before the fever, about her mother who had sung while she worked, and her father who had taught her to read from the old books he treasured. She told him about the long, painful recovery, the way people's attitudes toward her had changed overnight, how she had gone from being just another child to being that poor lame girl. Yates listened without interruption, his hands never stopping their work on the walking stick. When she finished, He told her about growing up in Ohio, about his little sister Mary who had followed him everywhere, about enlisting at 17 when the war broke out, full of idealism and certainty. He didn't go into detail about what he'd seen and done, but she heard the weight of it in his pauses, saw it in the tightness around his eyes. After the war, I couldn't settle, he said. Tried farming, tried working in a factory, tried a dozen different things. Nothing fit anymore. I felt like I was suffocating in towns and cities, so I came west, kept moving until I found these mountains. First time in years I could breathe properly. You ever get lonely? He considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But I've learned there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Being around people who don't understand you, who don't see you, that's lonelier than any mountain. Yes, Elara breathed. Exactly that. Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. Two people who had found the edges of society more comfortable than its center, who had learned to be sufficient unto themselves, because depending on others led only to disappointment. On the third morning, Yates held up the finished walking stick. The hickory glowed golden in the morning light, the carved designs dancing across its surface. The handle was shaped perfectly for her hand, curved and smooth. The bottom was capped with a metal ferrule he'd fashioned from an old tin cup, preventing the wood from splintering on rock and hard ground. "Try it," he said, bringing it to her. Elara took the stick with trembling hands. The weight of it was perfect, substantial but not heavy. The wood was warm and smooth under her palm, the handle fitting her grip as though it had been made for her alone. Which she supposed it had been. With Yates hovering nearby, ready to catch her if she fell, Elara used the stick to lever herself upright. She set it out in front of her, testing its strength, then took a step. The hickory held firm, supporting her weight without flexing. She took another step, then another. The stick distributed her weight perfectly, taking the strain off her weak leg in a way her old cane never had. Tears streamed down her face as she walked a full circuit around the campsite. It wasn't graceful, would never be graceful, but it was steady. She could feel the difference immediately. With this stick, she could walk farther than she'd been able to in years. "It's perfect," she said, her voice breaking. "Yates, it's absolutely perfect." He stood with his arms crossed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Good. Now you'll be able to get around Deer Lodge proper. Won't have to depend on others for everything." She walked back to him, slower and more careful now, testing the stick on uneven ground. When she reached him, she looked up into his face, not bothering to hide the tears. "Thank you. I don't know how to properly thank you for this. Don't need thanks, seeing you walk is enough." But it wasn't enough, not for her. On impulse, she stretched up on her toes and kissed his bearded cheek. He went absolutely still, and she immediately worried she'd overstepped, made a fool of herself. But when she pulled back, she saw something fierce and wondering in his eyes. "We should head to Deer Lodge tomorrow," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Get you settled with that seamstress. You'll want time to get used to the work before you're fully on your own." The reminder of the outside world, of the life she was supposed to be starting, felt like cold water. For these 3 days, she'd existed in a strange, suspended bubble where the only people who mattered were herself and this quiet, complicated man. The thought of leaving this camp, of walking into Deer Lodge and taking up her new position, filled her with unexpected dread. But she nodded because what else could she do? "Yes, you're right. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Something flickered across his face, gone too quickly to identify. "No imposition, but you've got a life to start. Can't do that sitting in a trapper's camp." That night, Elara lay awake long after Yates had banked the fire and rolled up in his own furs. The walking stick lay beside her, her fingers tracing the carved patterns in the darkness. She thought about the seamstress shop, about sitting at a table day after day, stitching clothes for other people. It was honest work, important work, and she was grateful for the opportunity. So why did it feel like walking into a cage? She heard Yates shift by the fire and wondered if he was awake too, if he was thinking about tomorrow. The thought of never seeing him again made her chest ache in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. She'd known him for 3 days. 3 days shouldn't be enough to feel like this, like something essential was being torn away. But maybe, she thought, when you lived most of your life not being seen, not being valued, 3 days with someone who saw you completely was worth more than years with those who didn't. Morning came too quickly. They broke camp in silence, Yates moving with practiced efficiency to pack his supplies. He fashioned a travois from poles and canvas, padding it with furs to make it as comfortable as possible. When everything was ready, he helped Elara onto it, securing her with ropes that would keep her from sliding but wouldn't restrict her movement. "It's about 8 hours to Deer Lodge at this pace," he said, adjusting the harness on his horse. "We'll stop midday to rest and eat. You let me know if anything starts hurting worse, understand?" "I understand." He swung up onto his horse and they set off through the forest. The travois glided smoothly over the ground, the furs cushioning the bumps and jolts. Elara watched the camp disappear behind them and felt something inside her twist painfully. The journey through the mountains was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. They passed through stands of towering pines, across meadows still dotted with late summer wildflowers, beside streams that ran clear and cold. Yates pointed out tracks in the soft earth, teaching her to distinguish deer from elk, mountain lion from bear. His voice was calm and even, but she sensed a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. They stopped at midday beside a creek, where Yates helped her down from the travois, and they ate cold venison and the last of the johnnycakes. The walking stick let her move to the creek's edge, where she splashed cold water on her face and tried to organize her chaotic thoughts. "You'll do well in Deer Lodge," Yates said behind her. "Town's growing. Lots of need for a skilled seamstress. I'm sure you're right. The widow, Mrs. Fletcher, she's a good woman. I've traded with her late husband years back. She'll treat you fair." "That's good to know." The stilted conversation felt wrong, forced. Elara wanted to turn around and demand to know if he felt even a fraction of what she was feeling, wanted to ask him to let her stay in the mountains with him, wanted things that were impossible and foolish. Instead, she gripped the walking stick harder and kept her eyes on the rushing water. They reached Deer Lodge as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks. The town was larger than Elara had expected, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street. She could see a general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, and various other establishments that marked a growing community. People moved along the wooden sidewalks, and the sound of hammers suggested new construction somewhere nearby. Yates guided his horse down the main street, the travois following behind. People stopped to stare, some calling greetings to Yates, others simply watching with curious eyes. Elara felt her cheeks burn under the scrutiny, all too aware of how she must look, dusty and rumpled from days in the wilderness. They stopped in front of a neat building with a painted sign that read, "Fletcher's Fine Sewing." Through the large front window, Elara could see bolts of fabric lining the walls and a woman working at a table. Yates dismounted and came to help her from the travois, steadying her as she found her feet and adjusted to the walking stick. "I'll come in with you," he said. "Make sure everything's as it should be." She nodded, grateful for his presence a little longer. Together they climbed the 2 steps to the entrance, Elara managing them slowly but without help. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The woman at the table looked up, and a smile crossed her lined face. She was perhaps 50, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled into a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "You must be Miss Anderson," she said, rising. "I'm Harriet Fletcher. I'm so glad you made it safely." Her eyes moved to Yates and her smile widened. "Yates Brennan, I haven't seen you in town for months." "Mrs. Fletcher," Yates said, removing his hat. "I found Miss Anderson on the road. Stage was attacked by bandits. I brought her the rest of the way." Harriet's hand flew to her mouth. "Good heavens, are you hurt, dear?" "Just some bruises," Elara assured her. "Mr. Brennan took excellent care of me." "I don't doubt it." Harriet moved around the table, her sharp eyes taking in Elara's walking stick, her overall condition. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters. I have a room for you upstairs, small but comfortable. You'll take your meals with me. The work is mostly simple garments to start, though I do get commissions for fancier pieces from the wealthier families." "That sounds perfect, Mrs. Fletcher. Thank you for the opportunity." "Oh, call me Harriet, please. We'll be working too closely for formality." She turned to Yates. "Will you stay for supper? It's the least I can offer for bringing Elara safely to me." Yates shifted his weight, his hat turning in his hands. "I should get back to the mountains. Need to check my trap lines." "Nonsense. It's nearly evening already. You'll camp tonight anyway. Might as well have a hot meal first." Harriet's voice brooked no argument. "I'm making venison stew and biscuits." A moment of internal struggle played out on Yates's face before he nodded. "That's kind of you, madam. Good. Elara, let me show you to your room. You can freshen up while I finish preparing supper." Elara followed Harriet through a door at the back of the shop and up a narrow staircase. Her room was indeed small but clean and pleasant, with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a mirror and a window overlooking the street. Her carpetbag, which Yates must have brought in while she wasn't looking, sat on the bed. "The necessary is out back," Harriet said. "There's fresh water in the pitcher. Take your time settling in. We'll eat in about 30 minutes. When she was alone, Elara sank onto the bed, her weak leg grateful for the rest. Through the floorboards she could hear the murmur of voices as Harriet and Yates talked in the shop below. This was her new home, her new life. It was everything she'd hoped for when she'd left Helena. So why did she feel like crying? She forced herself to stand, to wash her face and hands, to brush the dust from her dress and smooth her hair. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. 3 days in the mountains had put color in her cheeks, a brightness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She looked alive in a way she hadn't in years. Supper was held in Harriet's private rooms behind and above the shop, a cozy space filled with comfortable furniture and the lingering scent of herbs. The stew was rich and satisfying, the biscuits fluffy and golden. Harriet kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling Elara about the town, the customers she'd be serving, the rhythm of their work days. Yates ate in relative silence, but Elara felt his eyes on her more than once. When the meal was finished, Yates rose. "I should be going." "Thank you for the food, Mrs. Fletcher." "Of course. Come by any time you're in town." Harriet began clearing the dishes, giving Elara a meaningful look. "Elara, why don't you walk Yates out?" Grateful, Elara grabbed her walking stick and followed Yates down the stairs and into the shop. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame, his broad shoulders blocking out the fading light from outside. "You'll do well here," he said without turning around. "Harriet's good people. She'll teach you the business side too if you're interested. You could have your own shop someday. Maybe." Elara's throat was tight. "Yates, I don't know how to thank you properly. You saved my life, you made me this walking stick, you brought me safely here. You didn't have to do any of it." I did what any decent man would do. No, you did what you did. There's a difference. She moved closer, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the way his knuckles were white where he gripped the door frame. Will you come back? To town, I mean. Will I see you again? The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Yates turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. I don't think that would be wise, he said quietly. Why not? Because 3 days wasn't enough. The words seemed torn from him. Because I find myself not wanting to leave. Because you're the first person in 3 years who's made me question whether I want to live alone in those mountains for the rest of my life. And that's not fair to you, Elara. You're just starting a new life. You don't need a broken-down trapper complicating things. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. What if I want things complicated? What if 3 days wasn't enough for me either? Yates closed his eyes, a muscle jumping in his jaw. You don't know what you're saying. I'm 22 years old, not a child. I know exactly what I'm saying. She reached out, placing her hand on his arm, feeling the warmth of him through his shirt. I know we barely know each other. I know it makes no sense. But I also know that I've never felt more seen, more valued, more alive than I have these past 3 days with you. Elara. Her name was a plea, a warning. You don't have to say anything right now. Just promise me you'll think about it. Promise me you'll come back, even if it's just to visit. Please. He opened his eyes, and the longing she saw there made her dizzy. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his arm, his calloused palm warm and rough against her skin. I'll think about it, he said finally. That's all I can promise right now. That's enough. He held her gaze for a long moment more, then gently extracted himself and walked out into the gathering twilight. Elara stood in the doorway, watching as he mounted his horse and rode out of town, heading north toward the mountains. She stood there until he disappeared from sight, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was still racing behind her. Harriet cleared her throat gently. That's quite a man. Yes, Elara whispered. He is. He's been alone a long time. Grief and war can do that to a person. I know. But I saw the way he looked at you. I saw the care he took with that walking stick. Harriet came to stand beside her in the doorway. Some men show love through words, others show it through actions. Yates Brennan is the latter. Elara turned to look at the older woman. You think he loves me? After 3 days, I think he's falling, whether he wants to admit it or not. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What can I do? He lives in the mountains. I'm here. He clearly thinks he's doing me a favor by staying away. Harriet smiled. Men often think they know what's best for everyone. Sometimes they need to be shown otherwise. She patted Elara's shoulder. But that's a problem for another day. Tonight, you need rest. Tomorrow, we start your training. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was both comforting and bittersweet. Elara threw herself into learning the seamstress trade, and it turned out Harriet was an excellent teacher. Under her guidance, Elara's skills, already strong, became exceptional. She learned to take precise measurements, to cut patterns that minimized waste, to fit garments so they flattered the wearer's best features. Her fingers flew over the fabric, creating seams so neat they were almost invisible. The walking stick made all the difference in her daily life. Every morning, she walked a little farther, building strength in her weak leg. She could navigate the stairs without help, could move around the shop floor to help customers, could even walk the 3 blocks to the general store when supplies were needed. The independence was intoxicating. Customers quickly warmed to her, charmed by her skill and her quiet demeanor. Women began requesting her specifically for their fittings, praising her eye for detail and her ability to make even simple garments look special. Harriet beamed with pride, telling everyone who would listen that she'd found a treasure. But at night, Alone in her small room, Elara thought about Yates. She wondered where he was, what he was doing, whether he thought about her too. Sometimes she took out the walking stick, running her fingers over the carved patterns, remembering the patience and care he'd put into every detail. It was more than a tool. It was a promise, a declaration written in wood and skill. 6 weeks after her arrival in Deer Lodge, a young boy burst into the shop, breathless and excited. "Miss Elara, there's a man outside asking for you. Big fellow, looks like he wrestles bears for fun." Elara's heart jumped into her throat. She set down the dress she was hemming with trembling hands and rose, grabbing her walking stick. Harriet gave her an encouraging nod. Outside, the autumn sun was bright and warm. And there, standing beside his horse with his hat in his hands, was Yates Brennan. He looked exactly as she remembered. Impossibly broad-shouldered, his long hair pulled back, his beard neatly trimmed. His gray eyes found hers immediately, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Hello, Elara. Hello, Yates." A crowd was gathering, townspeople pausing in their errands to watch. Deer Lodge was a small enough community that the arrival of the reclusive mountain man was noteworthy, especially when he was clearly there to see the new seamstress. "Could we talk?" he asked. "Somewhere private." "There's a bench behind the shop. In the garden." He followed her around the building to where Harriet kept a small vegetable garden and a bench beneath an apple tree. Elara sat, grateful for the support, and Yates settled beside her, his large frame making the bench seem small. "How have you been?" he asked. "Good. The work suits me. Harriet is wonderful. I'm learning a great deal." She turned to face him fully. "But I've missed you. Every day I've missed you." His hands tightened on his hat. "I've missed you too." Tried to tell myself I hadn't, that it was just the novelty of having someone around camp. But that was a lie. "Why did you come back?" "Because I couldn't stay away." "Because I spent 6 weeks trying to convince myself that you'd be better off without me, that I had nothing to offer you but a hard life in the mountains, and because I finally realized I was being a coward." "You're not a coward." "I was afraid," he corrected. "Afraid of caring for someone again. Afraid of losing someone else. After Mary died after the war, I told myself it was easier to be alone, but these past 6 weeks have been the loneliest of my life." Elara reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "So what do we do now?" "I don't know the proper way to court a woman. Been too long and I was never good at it anyway, but I know I want to try. I know I want to see where this leads." He turned his hand over, gripping hers firmly. "If you'll have me." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll have you." The smile that crossed his face transformed him, taking years off his weathered features. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with surprising gentleness. "I have furs to trade in town," he said. "I'll be here for 3 days. Can I see you? Take you to dinner, maybe?" "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." Those 3 days were a revelation. Yates was clumsy with romance in the traditional sense, but he courted her in his own way. He brought her wildflowers from the mountains, their roots carefully wrapped so she could plant them in Harriet's garden. He spent hours in the shop, watching her work with quiet fascination, asking questions about techniques and patterns. He walked with her each evening, adjusting his long stride to match her slower pace, never showing impatience or frustration. And he talked to her, really talked, sharing more of his past, his hopes, his fears. She learned about his childhood dreams of being a teacher, his love of books despite limited education, his talent for drawing though he'd never had proper instruction. In turn, she shared her own dreams, the things she'd thought lost forever when fever had taken her strength. The dream of traveling, of seeing mountains and oceans, of being more than just a seamstress in a small town. On the third evening, as they sat together on the bench in Harriet's garden watching the sun set behind the peaks, Yates took her hand. "I have to go back to the mountains tomorrow. Need to prepare my trap lines for winter, but I'll be back in 4 weeks. And I'll keep coming back for as long as you'll let me." 4 weeks seems like a very long time. "It does," he agreed, "but it'll give you time to think, to be sure this is what you want. I'm not an easy man, Elara. I'm set in my ways. I've got rough edges that probably won't ever smooth out. And my life is in those mountains. I can come to town more often, but I can't live here. The wilderness is part of who I am. I understand that. I wouldn't want to change you." She hesitated, then said, "But what does that mean for us? For a future, if there is one?" "I've been thinking about that." He shifted to face her fully, his expression serious. "My cabin in the mountains, it's rough but it's solid. I could make it more comfortable, add rooms if needed. There's a meadow nearby that gets good sun. You could have a garden. And there's enough flat ground to build a separate workshop if you wanted to keep sewing. Some of the other trappers' wives take in mending and simple work. I could bring it up to you from town, bring your finished pieces back down." Elara's heart was racing. "You're asking me to come live with you in the mountains. Not now. Not even soon, necessarily, but eventually if things keep going the way they're going, if you decide you want a life with me." He squeezed her hand. "I know it would be hard. I know you've just found stability here. I'm not asking you to give that up, just asking if you'd consider it. Someday." She thought about her small room above the shop, about the satisfaction of her work, about the independence she'd fought so hard to achieve. Then she thought about the 3 days in Yates's camp, the peace she'd felt there, the rightness of being beside him by the fire. She thought about waking up every morning to his presence, about building a life in the wilderness with a man who saw her completely. "I'd consider it," she said. "More than consider it. But you're right that I need time. I need to build my skills here, save some money, prove to myself that I can be successful at this. And we need to know each other better, see if this feeling lasts beyond the novelty. That's fair. That's more than fair." He brought her hand to his lips again, his beard soft against her skin. "I can be patient. I've waited 3 years for something worth staying for. I can wait a little longer." That night, after Yates had said goodbye and ridden back into the mountains, Harriet made tea and they sat together in her living room. "He asked me to consider coming to live with him," Elara said. "Eventually, in the mountains. And what did you say?" "That I'd think about it." "That I needed time." Harriet nodded slowly. "That's wise. Rushing into things rarely works well, but I'll tell you this, dear. I've seen a lot of couples in my life. I was married to my Harold for 30 years before he passed, and what you and Yates have, it's real. It's the kind of thing that doesn't come along often. How can you be sure after such a short time? Because of the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon, and because of the way you come alive when he's around. You're a lovely girl, Elara, and a talented seamstress. But you've been going through the motions of living rather than actually living. With Yates, you live." The words resonated deep in Elara's soul because they were true. She had been surviving for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to truly live, to feel excitement and joy and possibility. The next 4 weeks crawled by. Elara worked harder than ever, taking on extra projects, saving every penny she could. She practiced walking each day with her hickory stick, pushing herself to go farther, to build more strength. The weak leg would never be truly strong, but it was getting better. Some days she could walk half a mile before needing to rest. She also began to pay more attention to the mountain men and trappers who came through town. She asked questions about life in the high country, about what supplies were essential, what skills she'd need. Some looked at her strangely, but others, sensing her genuine interest, shared their knowledge freely. When Yates returned, it was with the first snow of autumn. He rode into town leading a pack horse laden with furs, his breath misting in the cold air. Elara was helping a customer when she saw him through the shop window. She finished the transaction with shaking hands, then grabbed her walking stick and hurried outside. He dismounted when he saw her, a smile breaking across his bearded face. "Hello, beautiful. You're early. I wasn't expecting you for another 3 days. Finished my work faster than planned. Couldn't see the point in staying away when I could be here." He glanced at the shop. "Are you working? I can take a break. Let me tell Harriet." They walked to the small restaurant at the edge of town, one of the few establishments in Deer Lodge with actual tablecloths and decent food. Over coffee and pie, they caught up on the past weeks. Yates told her about preparing his cabin for winter, about a close call with a mountain lion, about the first snow falling on the high peaks. Elara told him about the dress commission she'd completed for the mayor's wife, about the new walking route she'd mastered, about the books she'd been reading by lamplight. "You're walking farther," he observed. "I can see it in the way you move. You're more confident. Every day a little farther. The stick you made, it's changed everything. I never thought I'd be able to walk this well." Pride and something deeper flickered in his eyes. "You did the work. The stick is just a tool. An important tool." She set down her coffee cup. "Yates, I've been thinking about what you said, about the cabin, about the possibility of a future together." He went very still, his full attention focused on her. "I'm not ready yet," she continued. "I need more time here, more time to learn and save and prepare. But I want you to know that I'm seriously considering it, that when I think about my future, you're in it." The breath he released was shaky. "You have no idea how much that means to me." "I think I do." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Because I feel the same way when you tell me you're coming back to see me. Like something locked up inside me is finally opening." Over the winter months, Yates came to town every 3 to 4 weeks, staying for a few days each time. Their courtship deepened, moving from tentative exploration to genuine intimacy. He met her in the shop, watching her work with quiet pride. They took long walks when weather permitted, bundled against the cold. He taught her to identify animal tracks in snow, to read weather signs in the clouds. She taught him about fabric and fashion, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with your hands. The town grew accustomed to seeing them together. Some gossiped, of course, wondering what a talented young seamstress saw in a rough mountain man. But most saw what Harriet had seen from the beginning: 2 people who fit together in a way that transcended social expectations. In the spring, when the snows melted and the first wildflowers appeared, Yates arrived in town with something new in his eyes. They walked out to a meadow beyond the edge of Deer Lodge, where young grass was just beginning to green and the mountains rose magnificent against the blue sky. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice oddly nervous, "about us, about the future." "So have I. I know we agreed you'd need more time, and if you do, that's fine. I can wait. But I need you to know that I love you, Elara. I'm in love with you. I have been since those first days in camp, though I didn't recognize it then." Her breath caught. "I love you too. I think I started falling when you handed me that coffee cup and treated me like I was worth saving." He cupped her face in his large hands, his gray eyes searching hers. "Then marry me. Marry me and come to the mountains. I'll build you the finest cabin in Montana Territory. I'll make sure you have everything you need to keep sewing if that's what makes you happy. I'll spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The kiss he gave her was gentle at first, almost reverent, then deeper as she pressed closer to him. She dropped her walking stick, not caring that it fell to the grass, and wrapped her arms around his neck. He held her like she was infinitely precious, like she was everything he'd been searching for in those lonely mountains. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Deer Lodge. Harriet stood up with Elara, and an old trapper friend of Yates's named George stood up with him. Half the town attended, curious and supportive in equal measure. Elara wore a dress she'd made herself, simple but elegant in cream-colored silk Harriet had given her as a wedding present. Yates wore new clothes, his beard trimmed neat, his hair pulled back. When he saw her walking down the aisle toward him, leaning on her hickory walking stick, tears shone in his eyes. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered when she reached him. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Yates kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward was held at Harriet's, with food and music and dancing. Elara couldn't dance, but Yates held her close and swayed with her to the music, and it was perfect. As the sun set and the party wound down, Harriet pulled Elara aside. "I'm so happy for you, dear, but I'll miss you terribly." "I'll miss you too. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You've been like a mother to me. You'll come visit, and I expect you to keep taking in sewing work. I'll send pieces up to you whenever I can. Your talent shouldn't go to waste just because you're living in the mountains." "I'd like that. Thank you, Harriet, for everything." They left Deer Lodge the next morning, Elara riding behind Yates on his patient horse, her arms wrapped around his waist. Her few possessions were packed on the second horse, along with bolts of fabric, sewing supplies, and all the tools of her trade. The walking stick was tied carefully to the saddle, within easy reach. The journey to Yates's cabin took most of the day. They climbed steadily into the mountains, following trails that grew narrower and more remote. Elara watched the landscape change around them, the way civilization fell away to be replaced by untamed wilderness. Instead of fear, she felt excitement building in her chest. The cabin, when they reached it, was better than she'd imagined. It sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a stream running nearby and a view of the peaks that took her breath away. The structure itself was solid, built from thick logs chinked tight against the weather. Yates had added a covered porch across the front, with a bench where they could sit and watch the sunset. "It's not much yet," Yates said, helping her down from the horse. "But I've been working on it all spring. There's a separate room we can turn into your workshop. The roof is new, and I've insulated the walls with moss and clay. We'll be warm through winter." Elara leaned on her walking stick and looked around the clearing. She could see evidence of Yates's recent work. Fresh cut lumber stacked near the cabin, a new chicken coop, a vegetable garden plot that had been turned and prepared for planting. He'd been building a home, not just a shelter. "It's perfect," she said. "It's absolutely perfect." He carried her over the threshold, making her laugh, then set her carefully on her feet inside. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy table and chairs, and a bed covered in thick furs. Shelves held supplies and cooking equipment. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace, cushioned with soft deer hide. "I made the chair for you," Yates said, suddenly shy. "Thought you might like to sit and sew by the fire on winter evenings." She walked to the chair, running her hands over the smooth wood. The craftsmanship was excellent, the rockers perfectly balanced. "You made this. Had a lot of time on my hands waiting for you." She turned and walked back to him, not bothering to hide the tears on her cheeks. "I love it. I love all of it. I love you." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I'm going to make you so happy, Elara. I swear it. You already have." That night they lay together in the big bed, the fire crackling low in the hearth. Yates held her against his chest, his arms around her, and Elara felt more at peace than she ever had in her life. The weakness in her leg didn't matter here. The opinions of others didn't matter here. Only this man, this cabin, this wild, beautiful place mattered. "Tell me about your plans for the workshop," she murmured sleepily. His voice rumbled through his chest. "I'll frame it out this summer. Big windows on the south side for light, a proper work table at the right height so you don't strain your back, shelves for all your supplies, and a stove so you can work in there even in winter if you want. You've thought of everything. I tried, want you to be comfortable, want you to be able to keep doing what you love." She tilted her head back to look at him. "What I love is being with you. The sewing is work, important work that I'm proud of, but this is life." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "Then let's live, Mrs. Brennan. Let's really live." The first year of their marriage was an education in adaptation and compromise. Elara learned the rhythms of mountain life, when to plant and harvest, how to preserve food for winter, how to recognize the signs of approaching weather. Yates proved to be an excellent teacher, patient with her questions and generous with his knowledge. He built her the workshop as promised, and true to Harriet's word, sewing work began arriving from Deer Lodge and even from other towns as word of her skills spread. The walking stick remained her constant companion. Every day, as Yates had predicted, Elara walked farther. She learned the trails around their cabin, the best spots to pick berries, the meadows where wildflowers grew in profusion. Her weak leg grew stronger with the constant use and good food. She would never run, would never be truly able-bodied, but she became capable in ways she'd never dreamed possible. Yates was a devoted husband, attentive and protective without being smothering. He consulted her on decisions, valued her opinions, shared his inner thoughts and feelings with an honesty that sometimes surprised her. She learned to read the subtle changes in his moods, to know when he needed solitude to process his thoughts, and when he needed her presence to anchor him. In turn, he learned when her leg pained her more than usual, when she needed help, and when she needed to push through on her own for the satisfaction of achievement. They made the journey to Deer Lodge every 6 weeks or so, where Elara would visit with Harriet, deliver finished sewing projects and collect new ones, and stock up on supplies they couldn't produce themselves. The townspeople always greeted them warmly, and there was general consensus that the marriage was a successful one. Harriet took particular pride in this, claiming she'd known from the beginning they were meant for each other. Winter came harsh and cold, with snow piling deep around the cabin. Elara had worried she might feel trapped, confined, but instead she found the enforced intimacy of those months deepening her connection with Yates even further. They spent long evenings by the fire, she with her sewing and he with the carvings he'd taken up, his skilled hands creating beautiful objects from wood. They read aloud to each other from the books they'd brought or borrowed, everything from adventure novels to poetry. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other in ways that went beyond the physical. And they made love with a passion that surprised them both, Yates infinitely gentle with her body and her limitations, finding ways to bring her pleasure that required no impossible contortions or strength. In his arms, Elara never felt broken or less than. She felt cherished, desired, whole. Spring brought a new discovery. Elara had suspected for several weeks, but when she was finally certain, she waited for the perfect moment to tell Yates. It came on an evening when they were sitting on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of gold and rose. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I have something to tell you, she said quietly. He looked over at her, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. What is it? I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. For a moment, Yates simply stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then it transformed, joy and wonder and fear all chasing across his features. You're sure? I'm sure. I'd guess I'm about 3 months along. The baby should come in early autumn. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears streaming down his face into his beard. I never thought, he said, his voice breaking. I never let myself hope for this. A family, a child. Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He placed his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. A baby, our baby. I'm scared, she admitted. About the birth, about whether I'll be able to care for a child properly with my leg the way it is. We'll figure it out together. And you're stronger than you think, Elara. So much stronger. He kissed her forehead. We'll need to make sure we're prepared. I'll get word to Deer Lodge, find out if there's a midwife who'd be willing to come out here when the time comes. They spent the summer preparing for the baby's arrival. Yates built a cradle from smooth pine, carving it with the same intricate patterns that adorned Elara's walking stick. Elara sewed tiny clothes, blankets, diapers. They cleared space in the bedroom for the cradle and the small dresser Yates built to hold baby things. Word spread through the mountain community, and they received visits from other trappers and their families, many offering advice and used baby items their own children had outgrown. The midwife from Deer Lodge, a capable woman named Ruth, came out to the cabin twice during the pregnancy to check on Elara's progress. She pronounced both mother and baby healthy, though she did express some concern about the potential difficulty of labor given Elara's weak leg and the possibility of complications. But you're young and strong otherwise, Ruth said. And I've delivered babies in worse situations than this. When your time comes, send your husband for me. I'll come right away. The baby arrived on a cool September evening with the first hint of autumn in the air. Elara had been having mild contractions all day, but she didn't want to worry Yates until she was sure it was truly labor. By late afternoon, she could no longer hide it. Yates immediately rode for Deer Lodge, bringing Ruth back by late evening. The labor was long and difficult. Elara's weak leg cramped and spasmed, and there were moments when she was certain she couldn't continue. But Yates never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement even when she was sure she couldn't hear him through the pain. Ruth worked with calm efficiency, guiding them through each stage. When the baby finally arrived in the early hours of morning, its first cry filling the cabin, Elara collapsed back against the pillows in exhausted relief. Ruth quickly cleaned and wrapped the infant, then placed the bundle in Elara's arms. You have a son, she said with a smile. A big, healthy boy. Elara looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket, at the shock of dark hair and the scrunched features. The baby's eyes opened, revealing gray irises that looked remarkably like his father's. Her heart expanded so suddenly and completely she thought it might burst. A son, she whispered. Yates, we have a son. Yates sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Elara's shoulders, staring at his child with an expression of absolute awe. He's perfect, absolutely perfect. What should we name him? Elara asked. They had discussed names, of course, but hadn't settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, one name seemed to rise above all others. Samuel, Yates said quietly. After my friend, the trapper who died. He was a good man. I'd like our son to carry his name. Samuel Brennan, Elara tested the sound of it. I like it. It's strong. Ruth stayed for 3 days, making sure both mother and baby were recovering well. She taught Elara how to nurse the baby, how to care for the umbilical stump, how to swaddle tightly enough to keep him feeling secure. She also spoke frankly to Yates about supporting his wife through the recovery period. "She's going to be exhausted for weeks," Ruth said. "Her body has been through trauma. She needs rest, good food, and help with the baby. Don't expect her to jump back into normal life right away." "I'll take care of her," Yates promised. "Whatever she needs." He kept that promise faithfully. For the first month, he took over all the household tasks, cooking and cleaning, while Elara focused on recovering and learning to care for Samuel. He built a sling she could wear that allowed her to carry the baby while keeping her hands free, essential given her need for the walking stick. He stood watch over them both at night, getting up with the baby so Elara could sleep in longer stretches. Samuel proved to be a relatively easy baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. As Elara recovered, she found a rhythm to motherhood that worked with her physical limitations. The walking stick became even more essential, a third limb that allowed her to move around the cabin and clearing with the baby in her arms or the sling. On days when her leg was particularly painful, Yates would carry Samuel while she walked beside them, his patience never wavering. The first time Elara took Samuel for a walk by herself, using only her walking stick for balance while the baby rested against her chest in the sling, she cried with joy and pride. It was only a short circuit around the clearing, but it was hers, accomplished through her own strength and determination. When she returned to the cabin, Yates was waiting on the porch, his face split by a huge grin. "You did it," he said. "I did it. We walked all the way to the stream and back." He pulled her close, careful not to crush the baby between them. "I am so proud of you, so incredibly proud." As Samuel grew, he became the center of their world. He had his father's build, large and sturdy for his age, and his mother's gentle temperament. He also developed an early attachment to Elara's walking stick, fascinated by the carved patterns. As soon as he could crawl, he would make his way to wherever the stick was propped, pulling himself up to stand by gripping it. "He's going to be tall like his father," Elara observed, watching their 10-month-old son wobble on unsteady legs, his small hands wrapped around the hickory stick. "Strong like his mother," Yates countered, swooping in to catch Samuel as he toppled forward. "Takes strength to keep getting up after you fall." They settled into the rhythm of family life with surprising ease. Yates continued his trapping and hunting, but he arranged his schedule so he was never gone for long stretches. Elara kept up her sewing work, though at a reduced pace, setting up a small work area where Samuel could play safely while she stitched. They made the journey to Deer Lodge less frequently, but when they did go, Samuel was cooed over and spoiled by half the town. Harriet was particularly delighted by the baby, insisting on being called Grandmother Harriet. She lavished gifts on Samuel and continued to send sewing work to Elara, though she was careful not to overwhelm her with deadlines. "You have a family to raise," Harriet said during one visit. "The sewing is important, but it's not everything anymore." "It's still important to me," Elara insisted. "It's my work, my contribution. I need to be more than just a wife and mother." "You could never be just anything," Harriet said with a smile, "but I understand. Just promise me you won't push yourself too hard." The years passed with surprising swiftness. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious child who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Yates began teaching him woodcraft as soon as he was old enough to understand, taking him on short expeditions into the forest. Elara watched her boys disappear into the trees and felt her heart swell with contentment. When Samuel was 3, Elara realized she was pregnant again. The news brought the same mix of joy and apprehension as the first time, but she felt more prepared now, more confident in her ability to handle the challenges ahead. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when labor began on a warm spring evening, Ruth arrived in time to help deliver a daughter with Elara's fine features and Yates's gray eyes. "What about Elara?" Yates suggested as they admired their new daughter. "After your mother." "Elara Brennan," Elara tested the name. "Yes, that's perfect." Samuel was initially suspicious of the tiny red-faced creature that had invaded his home, but within days he was utterly devoted to his baby sister, wanting to help with every aspect of her care. Elara and Yates watched their children together and marveled at the life they'd built. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Samuel carefully show Elara a pine cone while she gurgled happily at him. "Leaving Deer Lodge, living all the way out here." "Not for a moment," Elara said honestly. "Do you ever regret taking in a lame woman from a wrecked stagecoach?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You were never lame to me, Elara. From the first moment I saw you, trapped in that wreckage but refusing to give up, you were the strongest person I'd ever met. The walking stick didn't make you strong. It just let the world see what I already knew." She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content. "We've built something good here, haven't we? We've built something extraordinary. More years passed. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, naturally taking to the mountain life. Elara proved to have her mother's eye for beauty and detail, showing an early talent for both sewing and drawing. They were joined eventually by 2 more children, another boy and girl, each welcomed with the same fierce love as the first 2. The cabin grew with them, Yates adding rooms and improving the structure as needed. The workshop Elara used became a true business, with women from 3 different towns seeking out her skill. She hired 2 assistants from Deer Lodge who made the trip up to the cabin once a week to help with simpler projects, allowing Elara to focus on the intricate work she loved. The walking stick remained her constant companion through it all. It aged along with her, the hickory darkening to a deep honey color, the carved patterns worn smooth from years of use. Elara had walked thousands of miles with that stick, each step a testament to Yates's belief in her and her own determination. Her weak leg would never be strong, but it was capable. She could walk the trails she loved, keep up with her children on shorter expeditions, move through her life with independence and grace. On their 20th anniversary, Yates surprised her with a trip back to Deer Lodge to see Harriet, who was now quite elderly but still sharp as ever. They left the children with a trusted neighbor family and rode down the mountain together, just the 2 of them. Harriet wept when she saw them, pulling both into fierce hugs. "Look at you 2, she said, "still so in love after all these years." "All thanks to you," Elara said. "If you hadn't given me a chance, hadn't been so welcoming, none of this would have happened." "Nonsense. You 2 were meant to find each other. I just happened to be conveniently placed." But Harriet's eyes shone with pride and affection. That evening, Yates took Elara to the same meadow where he'd proposed all those years ago. The wildflowers were in full bloom, painting the ground in a riot of color. He held her hand as they walked slowly through the grass, Elara leaning on her hickory stick. "Do you remember standing here?" he asked. "When I asked you to marry me? I remember everything about that day. I remember being terrified and excited and so absolutely certain that I was making the right choice." "Were you right?" She stopped walking and turned to face him, reaching up to cup his bearded face in her hands. Yates was 50 now, his dark hair streaked with silver, lines carved deep around his eyes. But to her, he was as handsome as the day he'd lifted her from that wrecked stagecoach. "I was more right than I could possibly have known," she said. "You've given me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible. You've given me children and purpose and a home where I belong completely." You've never once made me feel like my weakness was a burden. You've only ever made me feel strong." He pulled her close, kissing her with the same tenderness he'd shown 20 years earlier. "You are strong, strongest person I know, and I've loved you every single day we've been together. We'll love you every day we have left." They stayed in the meadow until sunset, talking about their life together, their children's futures, the dreams they still wanted to chase. When they finally made their way back to town, Elara moved slowly but surely, the walking stick Yates had carved for her all those years ago as reliable as ever. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of mountain life and family. Their children grew and eventually made their own ways in the world. Samuel became a trapper like his father, though he chose to live closer to Deer Lodge to be near the woman he'd fallen in love with. Elara married a teacher and moved to Helena, where she opened a successful dress shop that carried on her mother's reputation for exceptional work. The younger two children also found their paths, each carrying with them the lessons of strength and perseverance they'd learned growing up in the mountains. Elara and Yates found themselves alone again, the cabin feeling enormous without the chaos of children. But they adapted to this new phase of life as they had adapted to everything else. They spent their days working at their individual crafts, their evenings together on the porch or by the fire. They took longer walks now, Elara's pace slower than it once had been, but her determination undiminished. "How far do you think you've walked with that stick?" Yates asked one day as they rested beside their favorite stream, the water rushing cold and clear over smooth stones. Elara looked down at the hickory walking stick, its surface worn smooth from decades of use, the carved pattern still visible but softened now. "Thousands of miles," she said. "Maybe tens of thousands, every day a little farther, every day a little stronger." She smiled at him, this man who had saved her in so many ways, who had seen past her limitations to the person beneath. "We've had a good life, haven't we? The best life," he agreed. "No regrets, not a single one." As they aged, their physical capabilities diminished gradually, but their devotion to each other only deepened. When Yates developed a persistent cough one winter, Elara nursed him back to health with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. When Elara's weak leg finally became too painful for long walks, Yates built her a wheeled chair that she could use around the cabin and clearing, though she stubbornly continued to use her walking stick whenever possible. On a warm summer day in their 43rd year of marriage, Elara stood on the porch of the cabin, leaning on her hickory walking stick, watching Yates play with their grandchildren in the clearing. He was 72 now, his beard completely white, his movements slower but still strong. The grandchildren adored him, climbing on him like he was a particularly friendly mountain. One of the grandchildren, Samuel's oldest daughter, came running up to the porch. She was 10 years old and full of questions about everything. "Grandmother Elara, why do you have that stick?" "Did grandfather really make it for you?" "He did," Elara said, smiling down at the girl. "A very long time ago when we first met." "Why?" "Because I needed help walking, and he wanted to make sure I could go wherever I wanted to go." The girl thought about this seriously. That was nice of him. It was more than nice. It was love, though neither of us knew it yet. Elara ran her hand over the smooth hickory, feeling the familiar patterns under her palm. "This stick has been with me through everything. It's walked me through my wedding day, through the births of my children, through every important moment of my life. It's not just a tool, it's a promise kept." "What promise?" "The promise that I'm strong enough to do whatever I set my mind to, and the promise that I'll never have to do it alone." Yates looked over from where he was being besieged by grandchildren and caught Elara's eye. The love that passed between them was as strong as it had been 4 decades earlier, perhaps stronger for having been tested and proven through years of partnership. That evening, after the grandchildren had been collected by their parents and the cabin was quiet again, Elara and Yates sat together on the porch watching the sunset. She leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders, the walking stick propped against the bench beside them. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For seeing me, for believing in me, for carving me that stick from Hickory all those years ago, for every moment since." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a broken-down mountain man, for building this life with me." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the peaks in shades of gold and rose, as they had done thousands of evenings before. Tomorrow, Elara would wake and use her walking stick to help her move through another day. She would walk a little, though not as far as she once had, and that was all right. What mattered was not the distance but the journey itself, not the limitations but what you did within them. The walking stick had given her mobility, yes, but more than that, it had given her hope. It was proof that someone had cared enough to spend hours carving and shaping wood just to make her life easier. It was a tangible reminder that love showed itself not just in words but in actions, in the small daily kindnesses that built over time into something unshakable. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, Elara thought about that terrified young woman climbing aboard a stagecoach in Helena, hoping for nothing more than a job that would let her survive. She could never have imagined this life, this love, this profound sense of belonging. She had walked so much farther than she ever thought possible, not just in physical distance, but in every way that mattered. And it had all started with a mountain man and a hickory walking stick, with belief and determination and love that grew stronger with every passing day. With every step taken together into an extraordinary future, neither had dared to dream alone.